Okay, hey everybody. Thanks for joining us and welcome back to the Dimension Fold YouTube channel and podcast. Today we have author David Collis joining us, and his book is called Interviewing Jesus, I believe. Is that correct, David?
It is, and it's the subtitle is The Man.
Okay, cool. The Man.
As opposed
the
to the
dude.
Son of God.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the premise of your book is that you were kind of like acting like a journalist that was sitting down and interviewing Jesus, the man.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about the setup that we have right here.
Yeah. So like you're podcasting with Jesus.
Exactly.
Well, but how did you do that? Like, did you channel Jesus in with a spiritual medium, or did you hire an actor, or was it more of like a novelist kind of approach creating? I mean, I've written some fiction. Is it like that idea where you're dialoguing between fictional characters, or like kind of just going for it? Or tell us about your process.
Okay, I think that's a very interesting point because one, I have been involved in this material and this subject since my, for 30 or 40 years, well, more like close to 40 years. And I just felt that there was a point at which I got a lot of new material that was coming to me, both kind of on an individual level and a kind of a mystical level. And I had already done a very deep kind of analysis of the history of the area and of Christianity. And I just had all kinds of new understanding that I never had before. And I felt that was important to address. And
Right.
I didn't know exactly how I wanted to address it. And I came up with the idea that I would actually just have a conversation. So
Okay.
that was like kind of the big breakthrough for me. And then I just said, okay, I'm going to do a Plato's dialogue here. And I'm just going to be doing asking questions and really trying to bear down with what it is that I know. And like I said, I studied Mediterranean religions. I studied religions of the world. I studied the history. I studied some Greek philosophy, Greek rhetoric. And I just realized that the person who we know as Jesus was a very complicated individual. And what we see in the New Testament is a very watered down individual. And of course, then he gets elevated into the Son of God position, which is a rather, to me at this point, seems very curious.
Right. Do you, in your opinion, do you feel like Jesus like made the case? Like, did he say I'm the Son of God, or was that something that we projected on him?
Well, let's just kind of, when I was going through some of these issues, I kept asking certain questions, and what's in the Bible and what's not in the Bible, or what's in the Gospels and what's not in the Gospels. And that was, what's not in the Gospels is very, very important to me. Especially when I started to ask very specific type of questions. But one of the things that we don't see until the Gospel of John is Jesus doesn't say, hey, everybody, I'm the Son of God, listen to me. He just doesn't do that. In fact, when his disciples and others ask him, are you the Messiah? He's very, very reluctant to even say he is that.
Right.
So the idea that he is now the Son of God makes the case for me that, or kind of presents a case to me that seems more fabricated than authentic.
Yeah. So, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I think I basically agree with you. But I will point out that there, skeptics will say, or critics, I guess, will say, yeah, but there's verses you can point to where Jesus talks about the Father, right? And
That's
so
correct.
it's implied that there's a father-son relationship. However, to me, it seems like in a lot of those cases, it's not the Father and a son, but the Father and millions of sons. Like, we are all sons.
Well, okay, so one of the questions that I had to really understand was, what did Jesus mean about the Father? Okay, so the Father has a very intimate way of presenting itself, right? That
Mhm.
I'm the son. Somehow there's a family here. There's the head of the family. There's the father, the one that's kind of helping guide us, all those kind of issues. What was intriguing to me was who else used the concept of the father, and it's not a Jewish concept
Mm.
per se, right? Because we have, Yahweh and Elohim and those
Right,
types of names. The
right.
Father is Pythagorean.
Oh,
It means one. So it derives from Greek philosophy about
interesting.
the unifying principle that is behind everything, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like the mystery of mysteries. The Greeks were interested in, these kind of metaphysical ideas as well. And, Pythagoras was dealing with numbers, the meanings of numbers, the music of the spheres, how all these things kind of relate. He came up with the idea of, a squared plus b squared equals c
right.
squared.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
anyway,
And
the one,
Pythagoras was also probably influenced by the Hermetic thought, would you say?
mm, in fact, if you kind of look at some of there's a book that I read called Jesus, the Son of God, S-U-N.
Oh
And
yeah.
in that book, the guy talks about the mathematical kind of hidden meanings between a number of sayings and references. And so, if I'm not mistaken, the parable or when Jesus performs the miracle of feeding all the 5,000 people,
Yeah.
there is a hidden square root number, and that square root number is also the same numbers that references Hermes.
Okay.
So there's a lot of information that seems to be under all of this, and then there's kind of the
Yeah.
basic ideas on uh, just really kind of basic ideas of Jesus going around and saying certain things, and a lot of the things that he said were, seemed to be very easy to understand, but when you really start to think about them, they get a little more complicated. And then, of course, he
Right.
said a lot of things that were very easy to kind of hear, but boy, start practicing them and you start realizing just how complicated they are.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, would you say that Jesus was a sayer or a doer?
He was both.
Yeah.
So he had a dual personality in that. In fact, one of them, I do believe that he was a type of a spiritual genius. And one of the things that he was able to do, and he did it so well, was that he actually went out and he talked and he performed, and he was willing to kind of he did. He sacrificed his life, to share the information that he had. So
Right.
the question is where did he get his information, and is it Jewish?
Right.
And that's another sidetrack here. And so I feel that based off of the influences that I saw in his work and in his sayings, there is a very strong Eastern component to this. There is Buddhism, there's Hinduism, and there's Taoism, and
Yeah,
then there's
absolutely.
also and then there's some Egyptian concepts, and then there's Greek philosophy, and his rhetorical style, the way in which he spoke, was Greek rhetoric. He used
Right.
Greek rhetoric. So you have to ask yourself, where does all this come from? Of course, there's also the Essene influence as well. So I address these in my book, and I kind of, the more I started to really think about this, the more I recognized that he had to have had. I kind of came up with two possibilities. One is that um, he either went to the west, or excuse me, into the east, and he spent a lot of time there, and he really kind of mastered the material, and then he came home. Or I think that he had some very profound experience, and I explored the idea of a near-death experience, and that transformed him and then gave him the information. So
Right.
I kind of
So,
thought there was those two ideas.
so yeah, I've had a few guests on, and many of my listeners will have recently watched the Ralph Ellis videos, and like, so there's a lot of different frameworks around like who Jesus is, what he did, what he was all about, and all that stuff. And so I'm kind of getting the sense that your take is sort of somewhere between a kind of an alternative take and a more orthodox take, where you're like, are you, I guess, which parts of the orthodoxy or the, theology or whatever, would you say that you are keeping from like normal Christianity, whatever normal looks like, if any? How would you answer
I
that?
would, obviously, I kind of think that I'm a revisionist, and I
Mhm.
believe that Jesus had a great deal of like we would call spiritual wisdom, and he had a very defined kind of practice, and the practice was how you treat others. And so he at all times seemed to be engaged in both the kind of the metaphysical and the intellectual, the kind of the mind side of human nature, and then he was also involved in the practical side. What does this look like when I tell you, to turn the other cheek, that kind of thing, right?
Right,
Don't judge, don't condemn, don't do those kind of things.
right.
Okay, so I think that there's that element that is very true. When I broke everything down, so what I did is I compiled all of Jesus's sayings, and in those sayings, well, let's just say this. What I did is I looked at the Jesus Seminar, and the Jesus Seminar scholars have classified Jesus's sayings as red, pink, black, or gray. And so red meant that those were what Jesus said was probably, there's no doubt, like of the 100 scholars, it's like more than 90%
Oh
believe.
yeah, like the old red letter Bible.
That's correct. Okay, so now
Okay.
if it was pink, then it was like, yeah, it's like 85%, really kind of think that he said this. Gray is, yeah, it's a little lower, and then black is like, no, he didn't say that at all. So
Okay.
I took all the pink and the red in from what they say that Jesus said, and I took all
Mhm.
those and I put them into single spaced 12 font document, and I came up with
And this is a standard, like these are like normal kind of conservative Christians who made up this document, correct?
well, no, what they did, the Jesus Seminar are New Testament scholars. And
Okay,
so
like NT Wright and those guys?
I think N.T. Wright would not be a part of this. I think he's more of a classical, Christian
Mhm.
theologian.
Yeah.
And these would be more like the historians, and theology and
Oh, okay.
Christianity are part of what they're interested in, but
Okay.
whether they have a strong belief in it, I don't know, because
Okay.
there's so many, but Borg was one of them. And
Okay. So it's more of the literary kind of guys.
yeah, so I kind of looked at this from a literary point of view.
Yeah.
And so once I compiled all of the sayings that they believed that he said, whether they
Mhm.
were red or pink, I then compiled my own document, and I compiled 25 pages single spaced,
Wow.
right? 25. So I went, oh my God. And that's not okay. So when you look at the Synoptic Gospels, which is
Yeah.
Matthew, Mark,
Matthew, Mark,
and
Luke.
and Luke,
Yeah.
those are the synoptics. John is he's John.
John's a bit weird.
That's a very different, that's a very, very different gospel.
Yeah.
Uh, and to me, there's a time issue here as to probably when it was written. And of course, I think it was reflecting, when I read a lot of the material, you can start reflecting the historical context. So just think about, imagine watching a movie and you see it from the 30s and you kind of go, I kind of know that. And no one's talking about World War II, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden World War II comes along, and all of a sudden you're talking about World War II. Okay, well, there's a distinction now between time. And I think that there's an element in John that is very similar. We're looking at a later rendition of what the gospel was, and that was probably because there were a lot of other social factors that were transpiring at the time, and they needed to kind of address the issues that were going on. And so, I've read this a number of times, and there's a lot of deep concepts in there, but then there was also kind of like a question and answer. So I kind of looked at this as like, from a literary point of view, it seems as though there's a question, and then Jesus is going to ask the questions, just like in my book. and they just kind of went down this kind of question, a Q&A kind of a thing. And then of course, then there's always, you throw in between what he says, things that he does, whether
Right.
they miracles or he walks over here and he says something to somebody else or he does that.
Right.
So anyway, getting back to the original question, yeah, there are a number of things. So with the 25 pages, I realized, wow, this is a lot of spiritual information. And that doesn't even include the Gospel of Thomas, which is a completely different gospel, right?
Mhm.
So, and that has some real esoteric knowledge in it, which is actually quite exciting to know. And so I started to realize that there was something very authentic and truthful about this. And one of them is that when I broke all this down and I set up different subjects. So what does Jesus say about money, right? So what does Jesus have to say about food? And what does Jesus have to say about the kingdom of heaven? Oh, gee, when I broke it all down that way, his number one thing that he talked about a lot, which is quite remarkable, was money.
Mm.
And it's not like money is evil. He was actually using it metaphorically as a way in which you can promote spirituality. I mean, this is quite remarkable. The other
Right.
one was food. And then the third one that he's sayings that he has the most of, there are 22 of them. And this is the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God sayings.
Yeah.
And in every one of those, there is not one reference to salvation. None.
Right. No, you're right. So that's very fascinating. I agree with, like, okay, so you mentioned the money stuff. I mean, the parable of the talents springs to mind, and really he's talking about like ethical living and kind of success, almost, like not exactly, but almost. So he seems to actually care about life on earth,
Yes.
and yet he keeps talking about this kingdom of heaven,
Right.
which what is that? And I think a lot of people are misunderstanding that to be some future glorious state in some mythical, mysterious realm that is non-physical.
That's
And
correct.
I don't think that's what he's talking about. What do you think about that?
Well, he says it. He goes, the kingdom of heaven is within you. So what is that, right? So
Mhm.
now I think you have to kind of tie in a little bit of somewhat of what the Jew, because he is Jewish, what the concept of the image of God would be. And so I think that he blended some of his Hebrew traditions with some of these other concepts.
Right.
So I kind of, he doesn't state exactly this, but there's the kingdom of heaven is a type of consciousness. It's the energy that we all inhabit, we all participate in. It's all coming from, it's all the cosmoses, it's the divine energy, it's our own energies. It's this energy that of who we are.
Right.
That and it's part of energy and consciousness. That's
Yeah.
what I think. And that he was trying to dovetail both the heart and the mind. All of it is about this walking between these two poles of being highly intellectual and then having just a big open mind.
Right.
So
Do you think that, like, um to me, the kingdom of heaven means that you can choose. It's at hand. So the kingdom of heaven is at hand, which means it's right here in front of you, which means you can choose to enter it, or you can choose not.
right,
You can choose to live right now in heaven or hell. And truly, here we are. If you look around, you can see both. Like, if you choose whichever way you want to kind of interpret in events in our current environment, you can say that we are living in hell, or you can say that we're living in heaven.
right.
And do you think that's what he meant?
I think that he was talking about, and remember, he's an example of this. It's how
Mhm.
you participate in this kingdom of heaven. And he says it quite clearly. The less I become, the more the Father fills me, right? And so he's seeing that there's this divine energy of which he's intimate with. This is not an abstraction to him. This isn't some, pie in the sky, wait till you die, none of that. No, he's saying it's right here, right now. start participating in it, and you too will have the types of experiences that I have, and you can do the same things that I do. So I think that as he starts to clear himself, right, because we all have our disappointments and we all have our frustrations and we have our family and we have all these things, that kind of tie us to ourselves, and we have our body and we have all our ailments and all those kind of things. I think that what he's saying is that when you free yourself from some of these obligations or duties, you actually start to free up, which is why he was so adamant about not participating on the Sabbath, right?
Right.
There's a number of things he says, don't fast, which is ironic because he goes 40 days in the desert where he does fast. And after that, it's just like, well, fasting doesn't even seem to be a part of his curriculum anymore.
Right. So he was really kind of open to the leading of the Holy Spirit, if you will, or basically was kind of living in the moment. Would be another way of looking at that, and taking the opportunities that present themselves without worrying too much about some kind of prescribed framework and do's and don'ts.
Okay, that's a lot of what's going on, but he does have some things that he's very sharp about, and that is, do not condemn, do not judge, right? Treat others as you'd want them to, be treated, as you'd want, be treated. Right. So there are those kind of things. Again, there's a lot of practice here, but the most important part is how he connects to others, how he shares, compassion with others. And what we see in Our Father prayer, he has a very intimate way of living his life in a very, very, simple way. And that is, there's God, and I'm always giving God the glory, so to speak. And, don't tempt me, give me my daily food, and help me to forgive those who, transgress against me. Yeah. So I think that because of his ministry, he went from like little village to village and town to town and city to city, and he was always walking around. I don't think he ever knew what was around the corner. Right. He had some general idea, but just think about, what I had to think about this, and that was, what was he saying in this prayer? And that is, he doesn't know what today is going to bring. And so he didn't know what was around the corner. So there's an element of what is unexpected. So he doesn't know if there's somebody that's going to accept him, or somebody's going to reject him, if somebody's going to make fun of him, or if, he's going to have some new person, but, who knows, maybe they'll backstab him, like Judas. Right.
Yeah. And all of those things did happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of, as you said, living in the moment, and he was allowing it all to happen. But as he kept allowing it to happen, the more he seemed to be completely in alignment with kind of the divine energies. And he understood exactly that this is what he was supposed to do. But I don't think that there was any kind of, I think there might have been some questioning before he started, but definitely once he started, I think he went, okay, this is it. Yeah. So wherever it goes, it goes.
For sure. He knew what his purpose was.
Right.
We're still trying to figure that out, but he knew what it was. So now you mentioned this divine energy, and he also said that we would do the things that he was doing.
That's correct.
What do you think about this? One of the things that he did the most in terms of his actions, rather than, and I know you're focusing more on what his words were so far, in terms of the process you've taken, but his actions were very, very often, a lot of what he was doing was healing people physically.
Yes.
How do you think, like, what's your take on, so his idea that you can do this, and the kingdom of heaven is within you, and the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and marrying that with the actions that he's performing that seem almost magical. What's your takeaway from that? Can we really do that stuff?
Isn't this interesting? Because the Christians never talk about it.
No.
They don't talk about, okay, this is what you
need
to do.
So the first book that I wrote, was actually about that. And it was saying, actually, yeah, we can do this. And I couldn't give that book away. I tried to do free seminars and courses. Nobody wants to hear that. And then I essentially got kicked out of church for it. That's the short story, you know. But you're right. Like, do it when you begin to follow Jesus and do what Jesus does. It does not go over well.
No. And that kind of goes into the nature of ritual versus the individual pursuits, right? So if we have a social body, and this is, you know, of course, this is Christianity too. So, and this is part of religion, is that you have a social body and everybody's participating in it. But then there's always this other path that, you know, the more, I don't know what you'd call it, sensitive, intuitive, there's something going on that's causing others to go, you know what, I'm not discounting this, but there seems to be a personal path that I need to go down, and I need to go through my own healing. I need to go through my own expansion. I need to kind of do a lot of other things on a very personal level. And where does that lead us, right? That's the spiritual path. That's that spiritual journey.
We have to let go of understanding and this whole head knowledge thing that we're so used to. And we're afraid to let go of it because it's all we know.
That's it.
So maybe that's the definition of spirituality is what's not just in your head. It's the other stuff.
Well, okay, so what we think about things actually start to really kind of manifest themselves. And so we have to recognize that Jesus was, when you kind of reverse engineer him, so to speak, part of the issue is that, you know, this is a Buddhist concept. It's like how you act, how you treat others, what you say, what's in your heart, what what your thinking is, that's all going to shape who you are and how you're going to interact with the world. And Jesus was doing just that. And the more he was kind of like, as I say, you know, as he empties himself, you know, he gets filled with the Father. Well, that energy, that consciousness, that whatever you want to call it, that intuition is now starting to become stronger and stronger and stronger and clearer and clearer and clearer.
Right.
So if we can get beyond a lot of our own pet peeves and disappointments and frustrations and think that I know everything, et cetera, and you really start feeling your heart, how other people feel, and then you kind of start asking, you know, deeper questions, you know, the road gets a little bit more strange and odd, and there's less and less people on it. And so, you know, you as an individual have to make some choices as to whether or not this is for you or if it's not. And, you know, I think Jesus decided to go down a much more difficult road. And he, you know, I don't think that there was a lot of people that followed him. You know, I know that the Bible says that there was, tons, but I don't think there really were. So.
Yeah, it's sort of, you get kind of mixed. You kind of get a mixed.
There's a mixed message in there. Oh,
mixed message.
Yeah. There's just 12. No, but there's actually 60. Luke talks about 60, and so
right.
Well, what is it?
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to the actual core of your book. So, hit me with a couple of the questions and answers that you and Jesus talked about, and obviously short renditions, because I don't expect you to memorize paragraphs or whatever, but what are the types, what are your couple of favorite questions that came through that process?
Well, okay, perfect. Okay, so what was going on in first century Judea? And how did your family respond to this? You were occupied by Rome. In one regard, the Romans kind of let them do what they wanted to do, but the king, Herod, had to do essentially what the Romans wanted to do, right? So as long as there was peace in the land, and as long as there was taxes being levied and then being sent back to Rome, things were okay. When things got out of hand, then the Romans had to come in with their own, with people like Pontius Pilate. Yeah. And then that got ugly. Okay, so what was going on? What was happening in the society as well? How was it transforming? So if you have a very a traditional Jewish culture, And then you have the Roman culture, which is the Mediterranean culture. How did these two come together? I mean, obviously it's not going to be real, it's not going to be very seamless. There seems to be going to be some major confrontations here, and lo and
Right.
behold, there really was. So I kind of started to imagine what this would look like, and remember when ISIS had their headquarters in Raqqa, and then they ended up blowing up and destroying that Roman temple. Okay, well, that's, you know, that's one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is, imagine Las Vegas with all of it, you know, the Sin City and everything that you can do there, and all the glitz and the glamour and all the, you know, the fighting and the, you know, all the spectacle that's there and the gambling. Imagine dropping that concept down in the middle of this very, very, very traditional way of thinking about things.
Right.
So there had to have been extraordinary, explosive issues that were taking place, and there were. And so Jesus is addressing that as well. Okay, so that was, you know, one thing that I was looking at. I wanted to understand what his family dynamics were. Just imagine if you're the number one son, right? You're born first, you're going to inherit everything. I do believe that his parents came from, they were wealthy. In fact, there's all kinds of things that would suggest that. But there's also something that Luke says, and that is that, you know, his mother Mary followed him along, and she was one of the women of means. So Jesus came from a wealthy family. And again, when you go down and you look at his and do, you know, kind of a deep dive into his money sayings, wow, there's a couple of things in there that are very, very, to me, were obvious, and that is that he's an entrepreneur. He's looking for opportunities. He had to have, he keeps talking about, you know, the plantation, how money is made, etc. And so
Yeah.
he's using those types of concepts within his spiritual teaching. Okay, so that was
Right.
one.
He does not have a poverty mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he's not, once I started realizing, man, this guy's not a poor person. He might have taken on poverty, but it's not, he didn't come from poverty. He had
Right.
a lot of privileges that others didn't have. In fact, he speaks in that. Okay, so the other one was, Jesus is this super smart, he's a genius. And yet everything he does has a lot of physicality to him. And usually when you look at people who are, you know, really smart, they don't really like to be doing a lot of physical work. You know, they're
Yeah.
not going to be carrying a lot of bricks and blocks.
That's why my arms are so thin and flabby. I'm too smart.
And both this high level of intelligence with the ability to do certain things. I
Yeah.
think we lost ourselves again.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay.
I think we're good.
So then I also looked at the nature of feats of endurance. What was it like to deal with these? I call them feats of endurance. Again, it's kind of the body. So, you know, one hand was like, well, I have to go. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to go start talking, and I don't think I'm going to make a lot of friends and influence a lot of people the way I'm going to be doing things. So I think that was a feat of endurance. His entire ministry was a feat of endurance. 40 days in the desert without food is a feat of endurance. And of course, the whole beating, the crucifixion is a feat of endurance. So there's another concept I was interested in. The other one was, if Jesus knows the Father, right, why would he need to go to John the Baptist? What did John the Baptist have to offer Jesus if he already knew all these things? So did he know things before he went to John the Baptist, or how much did he learn on the job? And so I can tell you that Jesus's theology before he went to John the Baptist was already formed. So now there has to be something on the job experience that he's going to have by actually doing the ministry. And, you know, you can read as many, you know, books and scrolls and things like that, but until you actually do it yourself, it's always just going to be something that's intellectual. It's not going to actually be actual. So I looked at that, and I looked at his influences. You know, where did these sayings come from? So I kind of narrowed it down. Well, there's Buddhism, there's Hinduism, there's Taoism, there's Hebrew concepts. There's the Greek philosophy and Greek rhetoric, and then there's the Essenes, and then there's a little bit of Egyptian. So, like, where did all that come from? Was there what? How do you explain that? If there's 6 or 7 different influences, how do you come together with all of those ideas in this package that you presented? Because it's not going to be, you can't go down to your local priest and say, hey, I have all this wonderful wisdom, let's start sharing it. That's not
right.
They're not going to talk to him about it.
Right.
So there's that.
I wonder if although he did kind of do that when he was 12 years old, right? Like the priests were amazed at his knowledge.
Yeah. And what was that knowledge? I think that knowledge was probably Jewish understanding of the divine, right? I think that things evolved. I think he evolved.
Yeah. I wonder, well, I mean, apocryphally, we are told that Jesus spent time in Egypt as a child.
Yes.
I wonder if he spent a lot of time in the Library of Alexandria.
Yes. Well, you have to say, why did his father take him down to Egypt? And what kind of connection did his dad have? And see, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that he was a man of influence. And so he had direct contact with others and probably some very smart people. The other thing about his father, so this is part of the other thing I was interested in, what were the family dynamics? You know, how much influence did his dad have? Was he a real hard ass, or was he, just like kind of a very giving kind of a person that understood things? Well, both he and his wife, Mary, Jesus's mother, seemed to understand that Jesus was on a mission, that he was destined for something, very profound. And so I believe that they believed that. I think Jesus believed that. And I think that they kind of had to accept that. And then how best can we make that manifest? How best can we help shape that and grow that? So I think that there was that. And then there were issues that I was interested in knowing, like, how did Jesus, what did his disciples learn from him?
Right.
And so I looked at Mary Magdalene, I looked at Peter, I looked at Judas Iscariot, and then I looked at Peter, and I tried to break down, what each one of those got from Jesus. And then at the very end of the book, I dealt with the crucifixion. Now, this is where things get murky, because I'm now looking at Jesus and what he said, right? So everything up to a certain point, well, you can kind of see there's certain things that are being said that Jesus is saying, and we can kind of say, okay, that makes sense that he would do something like that. That makes sense, something like that. But when it comes to the crucifixion, there's very little about Jesus in there whatsoever. It's somebody else's rendition and somebody else's talking. So how do you know what he said with Pilate? That's speculative, unless you know somebody specifically who was there.
Right.
There's a lot of things on a literary perspective in which Jesus is saying things that you can go, okay, this makes sense. And then this seems to be this is his practice. This is what he does. This is how he does it. Okay. So we're seeing all of that. Okay. When it gets all the way down to the very end of things get a little more murky, because you don't always have eyewitness accounts. And so somebody has to fill in the blanks. And so
wouldn't there have been wouldn't that have been almost a semi-public activity where he was before Pilate? Wouldn't there have been hundreds of people there, and probably the disciples?
I don't think the disciples got to get into those inner chambers. I think that there was a court, and it was a kangaroo court. So, how he responded, what he had to say, that was one thing. But most of the things seem to be put into Jesus's mouth.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he didn't say much in that event.
Right.
Like,
that's right.
He was led.
One of the things that I came up with, and that seemed, somewhat of a glaring, it became important for me, and it became important for the book, and that is John the Baptist, who was, obviously Jesus's cousin. At least that's what they say it is. And I do believe I have a whole chapter on Jesus and John the Baptist and what John offered Jesus. I don't think it was, baptism, you get the Holy Spirit. I mean, here's part of my logic in that is God can't fill himself with himself to become bigger. And God also, conversely, can't empty himself and become less, right? So how
Right.
can God fill himself with himself? I don't
Yeah.
get that concept. So right out the door, I'm throwing, Jesus's encounter with John out, that can't have happened that way. Maybe
Right.
there was something about that, but Jesus being filled with the Holy Spirit doesn't make any sense to me. Like I said, I don't think how does God fill himself with himself? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's another mystery that I
That's a good question.
right. So you can't, so if God is already, does God evolve? I don't know. I mean, that's a whole nother,
Well, I mean, look at the I guess the way that's framed in the Trinitarian view is that, God, Jesus is fully God and fully man
right.
and fully like, what's the third thing then? Or the fourth thing? I don't know. Like, so now there's four, like, yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's the Nicene Creed. We
Yeah.
get all that from the Nicene Creed. And so now we have to understand what were they trying to accomplish at that council.
Well,
And that was roughly 300 years after Jesus's,
yeah, exactly. And I mean, a lot of people had a lot of theories.
right.
And that council was meant to basically get a big garbage can and throw most of those theories away, even though there was probably a lot of really good ideas in there.
Well, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So the monk down in the Nag Hammadi desert of Egypt, he
Yeah,
happened to have
not gonna
died at that time. And so the books that he had were technically heretical. They were against the law. And so instead of burning them, he decided to bury them with
right.
him. And so that was what I mean, thank you for doing that, because we now have
Yeah.
this enormous source of information up which you were, really thinking about.
Right.
And the Gospel of Thomas happened to be in there. So now
Yeah.
we know.
Yeah. And I mean, I've only very briefly skimmed the Gospel of Thomas. To me, it didn't really seem much more Gnostic than John. Like, to me, John is pretty Gnostic. Any ideas on that?
Yes, I believe based off of what I'm reading, right? And so whether I see this or not, I don't know, but I just feel like sometimes I'm either a detective or an archaeologist, and you walk into, a crime scene, or you walk out of the ground, oh my God, look, there's a bone to a dinosaur, and it's,
Yeah.
it's bitty.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel like I got to the point where I was seeing things just by reading them. And it wasn't what was being said, it was, why are they saying this? And
Right.
the Gospel of John has some very, very strong, this is very funny, Hindu concepts.
Oh yeah.
Hindu concepts. When Jesus says, the Father and I are one, that is a very Hindu concept. When you get into the Gospel of Thomas, there are, well, not specifically the Gospel of Thomas, there's a little bit of kind of Eastern philosophy in there. But there are other books that the Gnostics had, and they have a very strong Hindu influence to them.
Okay.
So
I just realized that, like, that whole thing about how, he was with God in the beginning and all things were created through him and nothing was formed without him. That's actually very Hindu as well.
mm-hmm.
Never thought about that before.
Well, so if here's the other part, is that the Greeks were thinking in these big terms too. Like, okay, so we have creation, and then you have what is referred to as the prime mover. What moved things from this other mystery of mysteries, in which there doesn't seem to be anything. And of course, the Hindus and the Buddhists are very interested in this concept. What's behind everything, right? So is it nothingness, is it emptiness? But at some point, something happens that gets everything started, right? And
Right.
that's the prime mover. Is it a voice? Is it a sound? Is it the trumpet? What is it? I don't know, right?
Right.
But something happens, and it then gets the ball rolling. And of course, if there's a form of emptiness or nothingness on the one side, and now there's like everything on the other, everything on the other side must have some origin in the nothingness.
Right.
It's a type of a seed.
Right. And we kind of sweep that all under the rug and just say, well, God created the world or the
Right.
universe.
That's
But
correct.
that's not even what the Hebrew scriptures say. because if you read Genesis 1:1 in Hebrew and understand what each of those words are, what it says is in the beginning, or actually there's a little bit of the in the beginning might not even be totally accurate either, but I'll leave that and just say in the beginning, the Elohim separated the earth. That's what those words mean. And so the Elohim is not the same as Yahweh, and created is not even, it's not even in that verse. It's the verb there is bara, the Hebrew word bara, which means separating. And so we're already from verse 1, we're misinterpreting this book, and so that's the foundation of the rest of the book. What else are we misinterpreting?
Right.
Even mistranslating. Yeah.
So you like to go down the all those very specific words, right?
Yeah.
So that's very important. I looked at things out of more like the sayings.
Right.
Pile the sayings, and what are the sayings telling me? Okay, I'm going to just go with the Kingdom of Heaven sayings. Okay, so there are basically 10 themes, 9 or 10 themes. So we have planting and sowing themes. We have children. You know, the Kingdom of Heaven is like these children. The Kingdom of Heaven is within you. The Kingdom of Heaven is like pearl. There's treasure. There's the mustard seed. There's the strong man. There's leaven and meal. There's the unmerciful servant, and there's workers in the vineyard. Okay, there's nothing in that ever mentions salvation and that Jesus died for your sins. None.
Or sin. It doesn't mention sin at all.
He doesn't bring up that. Now, there's obviously a concept of sin in his culture, and you know, I kind of started to imagine if he went to the East, how is he going to take those ideas that are outside of the Hebrew culture and bring them back into, and with this new concept of the divine, how is he going to do this? And at some point, you can't just dismiss everything that they know. You have to kind of somehow incorporate it or reimagine it, or in a lot of cases, he seems to just not even talk about it. Like, well, if you're the Messiah and the Romans are over here and they're occupying us and they're really treating us pretty badly, and oh, by the way, the king is in the pocket of the Romans, and the high priest is in the pocket of the Romans, and the high priest every single day is making sacrifices to the Romans. Traditional Jews are going to be upset about this, and they were. So the idea is that how is Jesus going to, you know, push all this aside and become the Messiah, the one, the anointed one? How is he going to be like Moses or David or, you know, any of those kind of patriarchs? He doesn't mention them.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not saying, this is what's so fascinating. He's not saying, okay, let's all rise up and let's do this, and then we're going to kick them out. No, he doesn't do that at all.
In fact, the only time that Jesus mentions Moses, who is the guy, Moses and Abraham, like the two pillars, the only time he mentions Moses is when he says things like, you know, you heard Moses say blah, 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 but I say this other thing, or the opposite, or Moses didn't go far enough, or he went too far, or whatever it is. He's always not modifying these concepts that they have that are based on Moses.
Right.
I really like when he said, so back to this thing about sin. I like the story about the Samaritan woman, and you know, she had been with several different guys, and serial monogamy sounds like, so not that big of a deal. But he says to her, go and sin no more. But when, you know, the traditional understanding of that is, oh yeah, you're a sinner, but there's still hope for you. I don't think that that's what he meant. I think he was teasing her almost and be like, you know, tongue in cheek, okay, go and sin no more. Like as if he didn't really believe that she was sinning. I don't know. Maybe not, but
I'm in concert with that idea. The only ones that he seemed to be really directed his anger at were the Pharisees and the temple, the priests. And he called them whitewashed tombs. I mean, that's pretty serious. Because he says, you know, you hold the kingdoms of heavens, but you yourself are not going, you know, using them to enter it into it. So,
Right.
but I do think that there was an element of Jesus that was very smart. It was somewhat satirical, and he seemed to like to party a lot, right? He liked to drink wine, and he liked to
Yeah.
hang out with and he liked to hang out with people who were not necessarily the ones you would want to take home and
He
have.
hung out with a lot of hookers.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's going on here?
Well, they know how to party.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He
okay.
also wanted, and I would like to just mention, he was interested in restoration.
Right.
Okay. He's
Very
not
much
interested
so.
in saying, hey, you stop. No, he's interested in like, how do you become a complete human?
Right.
And those were the things that was really kind of focused for him. And he,
Right.
he didn't want to be living in fear. And I think a lot of people were afraid of everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so he
As
was
they
showing
still
them
are.
how, as of, that's just our basic instinct, is to be
Yeah.
afraid of a lot of things. And so he's showing you how you don't, and how you break kind of models. Like, you're not supposed to go talk to, single women. Watch this, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. So I think if you if you ignore the whole salvation and sin and rules and all of that stuff that that Jesus didn't talk about, what you see is a lot of like a really good man, and he's living well, he's happy, he's got good friends, and he comes across people and has really brilliant interactions with them that heal them both physically and mentally and spiritually.
Yeah.
And then he says, go teach people to do what I am doing.
Right.
That's his mission. That's what the Great Commission is about in Matthew 20, I believe it is. Or he never says go and convert people. He never says go and teach people that I'm the Messiah. He says go and do what I have done, and that is going around and being a nice guy and living life to the fullest.
Yeah, without fear, with
Yeah.
compassion, with a very clear mind. And yeah, so that's what I look at. I believe that he had an enlightenment experience, and that he was an enlightened individual. And so he was able to transcend all of those, all the shame and the guilt in his life. And he was able to sublimate that with these other kind of consciousness and this other energy that was available to everybody. And he just used it really, really well. And he wasn't afraid to do it and to
Right.
use it as needed.
Yeah.
And he also had a big heart. It says, what was the Great Commission? It was like, because he saw everybody was in dire need of just some care, some love, some compassion, some sense
Yeah.
of that things are not horrible, because
Yeah.
the political situation was difficult. And I believe, and again, this kind of goes into the economic what was happening in the first century. I believe that there was a depression at the time of Jesus. So all the building projects that Herod had initiated had finally, and the temple was being restored and remodeled. All of that ended. So I believe that there was, because he seemed to talk so much about people not getting paid, laborers not getting paid, that there must have been something that was going on at that time in which the good life was no longer really there, but there still was for some people.
Right.
But
Interesting.
under Herod, there was, Herod, he was the great builder. So he was building Sepphoris. So there's all those cities that are up there in the Galilee. He was building Caesarea Maritima. He built a huge mausoleum. He built Masada, and then at the same time, in conjunction with all this, the temple was being rebuilt. So there was a lot of building that was going on. A lot of roads were being put in, and I would imagine there was a lot of craftsmen that were coming in from outside of the area to accomplish all of this work. And I think when Herod died, and when his son Antipas, essentially he was an idiot. So in fact, Herod murdered his two most competent sons, because I think he had 10 wives, or I think yeah, it was like he had 10 wives, multiple wives, and a bunch of children, and he ended up murdering the most competent. So those who ended up taking over the throne were the less competent,
Wow.
which is why the Romans had to come in and just do what they did.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a little bit of time left. In closing, what would you like to talk about?
Well, there was a thing about John, the Gospel of John, and I'd like to just kind of mention this. Okay, so and kind of go back to that, because I like John. One, there's a lot of spiritual information in there, but I
Yeah.
think what happened is that the Romans destroyed the temple in 70, and then Masada was destroyed, and then there was all the killing, all the mass suicide. And I think that there was Christianity, as far as like kind of Hebrew kind of Christianity. I think there was kind of the gospel of there was the tradition, or the proto-Christian idea that Jesus died for your sin, and that there had to have been some level of reconciliation with the Gnostics. And so we're seeing this blend of kind of this proto-Christian, Jesus is the Son of God, he died for your sin, and then there's all this Gnosticism that's in there as well. It's all kind of baked into this, and that when the Great Commission is to unify everybody, I think it's in John 17, unify the church, et cetera, et cetera. I think that this was an attempt to break down the dichotomy and the hostility between the proto-Christians and the Gnostics, and this was their version of how you come together as a community.
I see. So in John, like, he has these kind of cosmic ideas at the beginning, and then he sort of slips into more, a little bit more mainstream kind of an idea. But then this is where we get some of the most famous verses that kind of have tended to support the traditional salvation view.
That's correct.
Such as John 3:16, which let's see if either of us can remember that one. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son,
Right.
that whoever believes on him shall not perish, but have everlasting life.
Correct.
And even here, though, even in that, which is kind of the prototype, it's not clear to me that he's talking about a heaven, an afterlife, or even death at all, because he doesn't use the words die. He says perish, which is an interesting choice of words. And when he's talking about everlasting life, does he mean I've got a river of life flowing out of me? Because that concept was actually talked about by Jesus. He will have streams of living water, and he will be like streams of living water. So to me, John is picking up on this idea that Jesus presented that is more of this energetic spirit consciousness, kind of like positive vibe that Jesus definitely lived out. And yet now we take John's words and are we just mashing those into like another, like, it seems like we've kind of trying to massage John's words into more of a Pauline gospel.
Yeah.
Or almost a Calvinist gospel.
Yeah. Paul did. I think that Paul, one, he didn't know Jesus, and two, I think he might have like been around a couple of people that might have known Jesus. But he came up with his own version using Jesus. So
yeah, that
seems
pretty obvious.
That's my take on it. And of course, he's a Pharisee, so there's a lot of how do you create a community? How do we live as a community? There are those elements that he is, really interested in. But Jesus doesn't seem to be interested in the community. In fact, Jesus didn't even create a church. Do you know that, right? How could he? He went from place to place to place. And so he had some followers. And after he died, they were all probably wondering, what do we do now?
Right.
Right.
Well, it's interesting. And maybe this is a good place to end on, because I think I like what you said there. That's a really basic question is, how do we create a community? And ultimately, that is the question that underlies all of civilization and every society that's ever been,
Yep.
is because community needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be internally peaceful. You can't have a society, like Jesus said, a kingdom divided will fall. And yet, when we look around and we see bipartisanism, and we see a nationalism on a global scale, and we see all of these things that have been causing wars and divisions for as long as any of us can remember, and yet they're the same shit that's been going on since Jesus' time. And even Paul, if that was his fundamental question, how do we create that community? He had some ideas, but ultimately they failed, because we still are asking the same question, or we're even failing to ask the question because we've given up, or we don't care, or we just like hating our neighbor. But Jesus said to love your neighbor, and so I think that's a really good question, and I don't think that we found an answer yet.
Well, something that we can explore in a couple of other episodes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's chat again for sure. And to all of our viewers, thanks for joining us. And please make sure you check out David's book. Again, what's it called, David, and where can we find it?
Yeah, my book is Interviewing Jesus the Man, and it's available on Amazon.
Great.
So I have a print copy, I have an electronic copy, and I also have an audio copy. You can buy one,
cool.
2, 3, or all three.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thanks a lot, David. We'll talk to you later.
Ken, thank you very, very much.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Please visit our sponsor, neandertees.com, fashion for the discriminating Neanderthal.